had to take a sip of coffee, so I don't get crazy because Fury Warrior talents are on Dragonflight Alpha as well as with the other talents for Warriors, which we will cover in future videos. But Fury is out and it's looking pretty good. A lot of people have been waiting for the Warrior talents, the Fury especially, and I don't think they are disappointed. And today we will be talking about potential builds, how they work together, what's missing, what could be added, and things like that in another Dragonflight Alpha coverage of the specs that we are able to test so far for you. And if you like what we do and you want to support us a little bit more, check the link down below to our Patreon page where you can get access to a couple of tiers and a couple of goodies if you are so inclined. Stuff like wallpapers, monthly meetings and chats with us directly on our Discord and things like that. Not to mention you will be supporting all of this content that we do, that we kind of do daily. Plus we have streams and we have tier lists and we have class guides and a lot of other stuff that you might find interesting on our channel. If you want to give a little bit back, we strongly appreciate and gratefully appreciate your support. And without out of the way, let's actually talk about Fury Warrior talents first, baby, because this is kind of the major thing that we want to talk about. And we're gonna look at the general talent tree first and kind of how it feels when it approaches Fury Warrior. Granted, with a little bit of a disclaimer, I have been able to test out Fury and look at the talents and see exactly what kind of builds are permeating through the community. So even this is not a lot of testing. It's just a first impression. It's what stands out as an all-time Fury Warrior main that I've been for the last couple of expansions here and there, although I've kind of slacked in Shadowlands and probably a little bit in BFA. However, I've been playing with a lot of the stuff that's new to Fury as well, so I am excited to see back. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at the general talent tree, which the first thing that you will notice is that stances are back. Yes, although they're not majorly impactful, they do matter. It's not like stance dancing is back, which is something that some warriors have been asking for years. Stance dancing is not something that devs want. They did put out a blue post saying that's not how they want stances to behave, but they do want stances to be something that you switch to and from on specific points in a fight for a specific buff. For instance, you know, if you're playing Fury and you might have Berserker stance, but you're in a phase where you're going to take a lot of damage, maybe you swap to defensive stance for a couple of seconds and then go back to Berserker stance and so on. If you do talent into defensive stance, since right now some of the builds that we're looking at potentially testing once we're level 70 don't feature defensive stance, but obviously that's utility and that can change. And speaking of utility, the big part of the tree, the majority points of the nodes at the top of the tree when you start off are basically utility, mobility, CC, defensives. And I have to say that this is really good. It's really good because the utility and defenses are basically one of the reasons why other people might want you into the group, because sure, you can do damage, anybody can do damage, and if you're not doing the most amount of damage, well, you know, that's you and let's say, I don't know, 20 other DPS specs. But the point is that you don't have to go through specific throughput options to get the defensive that you want, and you don't have to take the defensives in utilities and CCs that you don't want to get to the throughput that you do want. So this is particularly good, and there are not many nodes that you would like to go through that you would not actually like as a Fury Warrior. You have stuff like Double Time, you have stuff like Rallying Cry, like Spell Reflect, Berserker Rage, and so on, plus buffs to these, Heroic Leap as well, which is probably on the right hand side. And if you look actually at the tree, similar to other classes as well, it's split into like 3 mainish branches, indicative of each spec, where Arms is on the left, Prot is on the middle, and Fury is on the right. And although there's a lot of crossover between what is available and what has been available to the other specs over the years, some of them are clearly something that only one spec has had, stuff like, you know, a Frothing Berserker way down the Fury tree, and more importantly, Die by the Sword in the Arms tree, which is amazing. That is probably the strongest cooldown that Warrior has as a class, especially when you're fighting big groups of mobs. Having 100% parry chance is amazing. Plus you do have the 30% damage reduction, which is also really good, all on a 2-minute cooldown. If you do want to be cheesy, you can do something that maybe Fury Warriors have been waiting to do for years that only Arms was able to: intervene the tank, slap Die by the Sword, Boom! Instant stack reset for the tank. You give your tank a little bit of room to breathe. And not to mention, Die by the Sword is also good for the damage reduction. And if you are doing solo content for whatever reason, you get to parry all those attacks, and that is particularly sweet. And you have a lot of nodes that give you strength based on armor, or armor based on strength, or stamina, or leech. A lot of leech, crit chance, and all of that stuff, which we're not gonna, go too much into, because those are kind of a byproduct. Something that's also coming back, if you have noticed, is you can access Rends, really, which is probably not something that you will want to do as a Fury Warrior, because you might want to try the Blood and Thunder talent tree, talent option that's right below Thunderclap, which is also something that you might not want as a Fury Warrior, since Rage is maybe the most particular resource when it comes to Fury, since pretty much your only rage spender should be Rampage to maintain a high uptime on Enrage and basically play your spec properly, so any other rage consumers like Rend might not make it into your rotation. So you can try the Blood and Thunder combination to, make it a little bit more interesting, but I doubt we'll see that in any competitive play styles. However, if you do go down the arms path, and you will, and if you also go down the prot path, which you might also will, although you don't have to, you'll get a couple of things. The reason I said that you might want to go into the Proth path is because you do have Dauntless Duelist, which has been, surprisingly, I think Nadia's Soulbind talent tree trait in for Venthiers, not just warriors. So we're seeing like a non-warrior type conduit, we could call it conduit, I guess, that wasn't available, that was available for everybody, but it seems like warriors getting it. So that's kind of like, it's also on a weird spot because it's on a choice node with one-handed weapon specialization, and we will get to that as well. And the one-handed weapon specialization gives you leech, and you have to choose between leech and damage. And as far as warrior is concerned, even protection, you kind of always really want damage. But I feel like this is a missed opportunity, since I don't know if leech is the best thing to put on the one-hand weapon specialization node, where you could put something that has a little bit of throughput as well, further incentivizing Fury Warriors to play one-handers. And we will get to one-handers once we get into the Fury tree. And if you keep going down the tree, you'll notice Spirit Bastion and Avatar being the cooldowns there, which are likely going to be mandatory, especially for AoE fights, mostly because Spirit Bastion comes with Elysian Might upgrade, again, on against Piercing Verdict, which is, I don't know if Piercing Verdict can compete with Elysian Might, but we will see, since it is a big fat rage gain. And of course, down from Avatar, you have Signet of Tormented Kings, which is again something that has been pretty much bread and butter for Fury all throughout Shadowlands, as in opposition to Unstoppable Force, which is likely only going to be for Pro Warrior. So once again, this is probably not going to be a choice, since you're probably always going to want them. Oh, and also, speaking of Signet of Tormented Kings, maybe the greatest fallacy ever committed to Fury Warrior is that we don't have Bladestorm anymore. There's no more Bladestorm at all. I mean, you do get it from the Signet proc, but that's about it, and that is a little bit weird. I don't know if it's intended. It's definitely not there. I don't know how a lot of people will feel about it. I'm like half and half on it. Bladestorm is fun, it's an iconic warrior thing, but if you're playing Signet, you're gonna get a lot of Bladestorms anyway. However, there is a chance that if, people ask for it, so we can have it back somehow, maybe in the Fury tree. There are a couple of nodes of the Fury tree that are a little bit weird, that could be replaced. So, I don't know. Just in conclusion, right now, there is no Bladestorm as a spell that you can put on your bars, only a proc. So, on the, let's say, Fury side of the tree, where you have Thunderous Roar, which I believe it's Dragon Roar renamed, although the effect is a little bit different. Probably they didn't want a dragon-themed ability for Warrior now that we have Evokers, but Thunderous Roar deals decent amount of damage in 16 yards around you, physical damage, and causes the enemies to bleed. So you also have a bleed that lasts for 9 seconds. Why is this important is because so far it doesn't seem like it has a target cap, at least not from the tooltip. So far, anything that has been target capped or overtly target capped, it has been mentioned in the tooltip, and this is not part of that. Not to mention that the bleed from Thunderous Roar is also upgradable in the Fury tree if you ever so desire to go this path, although it's not that competitive with Avatar and Spirit Bastion, so maybe this can be something that can be addressed to, I don't know, maybe buff Thunderous Roar a little bit more, maybe buff Thunderous Aftershocks as well, to potentially keep it competitive. And with that out of the way, without actually checking every single thing like Shockwave, which you might want, but again, it's really out of the way, let's go into the actual Fury talent tree, which is not that bad. Actually, this is one of the talent trees that I'm not a fan of how they're distributing the points and how the pathing is, but I kind of like what they're doing with the tree. So middle side will always kind of remain. It seems like overall over the course of the entire game, big cooldowns, big spec defining cooldowns like Enraged Regeneration, Raging Rampage, and Recklessness, and of course you further down you have Anger Management as well in opposition with Reckless Abandon. We'll get to that. But that's probably like, you know, the core of the spec will always be in the middle. Then it branches out every now and again to the sides, which is not that bad actually, but it branches out to nodes that if you do pick, you kind of want to pick the prerequisites for those nodes also, or at least, for instance, if you branch out from Frenzy from the middle to Cold Steel Hot Blood that buffs Bloodthirst, maybe you want Fresh Meat, maybe you also want Vicious Contempt, maybe you also want Blood Craze to go with all those, and you cannot get those by simply branching out. You would have to build towards the left-hand side. So I don't know if these side branches are at the nodes you would prefer them to be at, since I guess we'll see. Maybe the improved Rampage could be a better transition to Meat Cleaver if you're not that interested in building towards the right-hand side, which we can talk about each individual side. Basically, the left-hand side is very Bloodthirst focused and the right-hand side is very Raging Blow focused, considering that you do unlock the improved versions of each of those spells as you branch out, as you go deeper into each respective side. Not to mention that on the left-hand side, something that maybe will make a bunch of Fury Warriors happy is Single-Minded Fury is also there. Not to mention that you do have Single-Minded Fury, you also have Frenzied Flurry, which makes it even better, where you do more damage with one-handed weapons by 10%, the damage is increased, and you also have a 50% chance to get enraged from your auto attacks, which is great. That mechanic is actually really interesting. It definitely increases the incentive to play Single-Minded Fury. The thing is, it depends exactly how it works, because Fury is a very fast-paced spec, and at the very least, at the end of the expansion, your rage gains are very huge. You're likely gonna have a very high uptime on Enraged. So I don't know how this will sim, essentially, how this will translate into overall efficiency, right? Because you might just override Enrages, and as far as we know so far, Enrage doesn't just stack on top of each other. If you have multiple procs of Enrage, they don't stack, they just overlap. So with that in mind, I don't know if the Enrage effect, although it's really cool, might actually be something that you might try at the beginning of the expansion, where your rotation is slower, your rage gains is slower, and you don't have that back-to-back rampages that you normally have with a fully geared Fury Warrior. But you will go deeper down into that specific left-hand side, which you will notice that it has, you know, like I mentioned, Cold Steel Hot Blood, which has been an Azerite in BFA, and Vicious Contempt, which I believe right now it's a conduit. I need to go there to a little crit node, and then you will see Odin's Fury. We have it back. Ladies and gentlemen, we have praised for years to get this back, because it was a cool ability, it was a different ability that can do some damage on a 45-second cooldown that's not particularly tied to either giving you rage or synergizing some way with Enraged. Although it's nice to have synergy in your spec's identity, having something that a little fun button that just deals a lot of damage is pretty nice. Not to mention you do put a little bit of bleed on your targets, which is not that bad. Well, it's not really a bleed, it's just physical damage dealt over 4 seconds, which sure. But if you do go down to Bloodborne, which is the node just under it, which is the capstone rather, the bleed damage from Odin's Fury, so they do consider it a bleed, and Thunderous Roar that we mentioned before, and Gushing Wound as well from Cold Steel Hot Blood, will all that bleed damage is increased, which is an interesting choice of design for the spec. I don't know if warriors in general have ever appreciated bleed damage too much, but hey, it's dot, it's damage, who knows, maybe this can turn into an interesting playstyle. And opposite to Odin's Fury, you have Cadence of Fujita, which is a legendary that we have right now in Shadowlands, and well, that's all fine and dandy, but underneath it you have an interesting choice node where you have Sidearm, which is clearly an auto attack buffer that launches, you know, axes or weapons rather to other enemies in AoE. This seems like a small cleave situation point that, you know, can do some damage. I can see this being used, let's say, in, I don't know, raids that have a couple of ads constantly. Maybe in dungeons you want something that does damage to more than just 3 other targets. And you also have Annihilator, which makes your auto attacks with one-handed weapons deal additional damage. Once again, one-handed synergy. One is purely single target, one is a little bit more AoE orientated, so it's interesting that it's not fully overtly going towards, oh, this is the single target build of the tree, although it does seem like these might work better in raids, but we'll see. And I'm saying this because on the right-hand side, where you have the Raging Blow buffers, you also have Meat Cleaver and Whirlwind buffs as a whole, which, you know, you probably never really use in raids. And obviously you have Ravager as kind of a capstone, because it seems like the capstones are just buffers to the abilities that precede them. Since you do have Ravager, and the capstone, rather, Storm of Steel, just increases duration by 2, which is a very, very boring capstone. I don't know. I don't know if this is ideal. I don't even know if you're going to want Ravager that much, to be honest. And similar to Ravager, Siegebreaker is back, and Deafening Crash might be better as you know, as an upgrade choice, but again, I don't know if you're gonna go for this, because you know, you would like anger management, especially if you play AoE, or anger management being in the middle side of the tree, especially if you play AoE, because you're probably gonna be playing Signet of Tormented Kings, which obviously goes very well with anger management. But I digress. One other thing that I did want to point out that I've been wanting to see Fury imported into its playstyle is Onslaught, which is a cool ability by itself, but has always been a little bit underperforming. It still does a lot of damage on an 80-second cooldown, generates 25 rage, and has an upgrade that maybe it might make it interesting and actually viable, Pulverize, where it generates 10 more rage and also enrages you for 8 seconds. Once again, we talk about, you know, the alternative sources of enrage that you have as a Fury Warrior, which could be good if you have a lot of enrage downtime, but even as we tested it so far on the alpha, where I think we had a level 70 character template with a 356 eye level boost, which 356 isn't particularly amazing, although we were slapping the dungeon very hard. It didn't particularly seem like I had a major problem with enrage uptime. So once again, I don't know if there's a lot of value that's going to be translated into this and Frenzy Flurry on the opposite side of the tree, where we have alternate sources of enrage. I like alternate sources, I like options and variety, but then again, in practice, will we need these? And if you don't need these alternate sources of enrage, then the value of the talent will decrease massively, so we'll have to see. Overall, the first impressions are pretty good. I kind of like it. It's nice. There's different playstyles on different sides of the tree with, you know, focuses on specific abilities, where you want a more bloodthirst single one-handed weapon on the left-hand side, or AoE big Titan. By the way, Titan's Grip is also on the right-hand side with Raging Blows that hit very, very hard. They hit very, very, very hard. I'm not sold on the capstones on the right-hand side. Sure, you can keep Siegebreaker and Ravager, but I don't know. I feel like the upgrades to these don't really match what's on the left-hand side of the tree with Odin's Fury and Cadence of Fujita. So we'll see exactly how these are balanced. I'm sure that the big theory crafters from Skyhold will already be in contact with the devs that are designing the talent trees and, you know, feedbacking to make sure that this is balanced and fun. But what do you think? Do you think Fury is enticing? Are you prepared to main it in Dragonflight? Because it is looking like a pretty fucking cool DPS spec to play. And if you do decide to, I can guarantee that you're gonna have a lot of fun and a lot of new toys to play with. And I think that's what's really important. And also what's important is thanking our patrons for supporting the content that we do. We love you guys. Thank you so much. And if you're the viewer, once again, want to support us a little bit more, and if you like to see more of this type of content, check the Patreon link down below. Thank you for watching the video. See you next time. Bye!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.